I think there's an incredible amount of selfishness that needs to happen when you start a business because the business needs to be your priority. It's just the way it is. It's too hard to do it any other way. So that was fine at the time.
Welcome to Made Locally, the podcast for people building real businesses in the real world. I'm Rahul Jaswa, and on this show, I interview the entrepreneurs that have built thriving local businesses to uncover how they attracted customers, built strong brands, and grew rapidly and sustainably. You'll hear from operators, founders, and experts sharing what's actually working across marketing, operations, and technology. No fluff, just practical insights you can use today. Today's guest is Ryan. He's the founder of RO Hospitality and the owner and operator of Table and Main and Osteria Mattone, two restaurants that have become staples in their community and earned national recognition, including the Michelin Bib Gourmand distinctions and multiple wine spectator awards. Ryan has spent his career focused on many of the hardest challenges in local businesses, delivering consistent hospitality, delivering systems that can scale and make success sustainable. He's an expert in everything from the back office to the front of house and designing kitchens and customer experiences. And, we feel really lucky to have him on the podcast today because he's got a huge amount of wisdom and insight from his years of building and operating local businesses in the restaurant industry. And, as you all know, many of our listeners are, aspiring restaurateurs or, are currently running kitchens and restaurants. So welcome, Ryan. We really appreciate having you and, excited to learn a bit more about your journey.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you end up in this line of work? How did you decide to take on this, this type of a career and end up where you are now?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm lucky in the sense that I always knew I wanted to do this. So I actually have a journal entry from when I was 10 years old talking about wanting to open restaurants. And I had that gift of sort of laser focus on this is what I want to do. So from my first job, which was as a line cook at an Italian restaurant called Sugo in Alpharetta, Georgia, through attending Cornell University's hotel school, graduated from there, worked in business consulting for a little while, and then went to work at Danny Meyer's Union Square Hospitality Group, which was a fantastic kind of boot camp for how to run a restaurant. And then I moved home to open Table and Main when I was 25. So that kind of arc of working in restaurants through high school, going to hospitality management school, working in both business consulting, which was a great grounding in what I'll call a real job, and then working in restaurants really prepared me for what I do today.
Wow, awesome. Well, there's a lot of, I would say, really prestigious things that you did kind of all along the way, some of which you touched on. And so it would be great to just kind of hear a bit about how those particular experiences shaped, where you are today. So, the first thing which I had heard about before is that you went to the Cornell school and really focused on hospitality and, graduated with honors and all those exciting things. As many listeners probably know, like Cornell is considered to be, world class, one of the top, if not the top hospitality program in the country. So maybe you could just share a little bit, like give us like a couple of minutes of, crash course on what some of the key principles that they sort of embed deep within you, what some of the intangibles that you came away from that are.
The real benefit of the hotel school was that it teaches you a framework to approach problems. If we consider hospitality, what's fun about hospitality is there's often so much gray area, right? There's an element of artistry to it. There's the culinary, there's the wine, there's all that stuff. And the ability to deconstruct those sort of artistic problems in an academic sense, Cornell gave me sort of the permission to do that. If you look at food costs, huge thing in restaurants, right? The idea of a declining budget is not something that outside of that perspective you'd sort of figure out naturally. So some of those operational tools, the more academic frameworks, really help you dissect the problem. There's that phrase or quote, I'm sure you've heard, I think it's by George Washington or Abraham Lincoln. I'm not sure who said it, but it's a great quote. And it says, if I'm given the job to chop down a tree and I'm given 10 hours to do it, I'll spend the first 8 sharpening the axe. So that idea that preparation and the academic intellectual approach towards a problem is worthwhile was really helpful. And I think that was the biggest benefit from my time at Cornell.
Wow, awesome. Yeah, that's a great Lincoln quote. And, I think it says a lot about, a lot of local business owners that I speak to sort of they have this rush and this impulse to kind of jump right into the action. Hey, I need to find an interior decorator. Hey, I need to, find, I need to build my menu. I need to, raise money to do all these things. And, it's possible that if they just spend a little bit of time sort of developing their skills, honing their craft, coming up with like a really refined perspective on what exactly it is that they want to bring to the market, they may actually be able to execute faster, more effectively with something more special and differentiated, at the moment that they actually decide to take the leap. So that makes a ton of sense. What are some things that you learned that maybe even today, like in the last couple of months, you feel like has, materialized in the way you're operating or a decision you're making or a problem you're dealing with?
Yeah, I have a great example, which is the idea of a tech stack. And I actually just wrote an article about this for Restaurant Informer magazine. But tech stack is a really consultant, jargony, gobbledygooky sort of phrase, right? And 98% of restaurants, what I love about being part of the tribe of restaurant entrepreneurs is we're scrappy, we have a sense of urgency, and like you sort of alluded to, you jump right into solving problems because shit's got to get done. I'm not sure if I'm able to curse on
No,
your
we
podcast,
are
so
we're
uh,
very happy to have people who are
okay,
authentic.
all PG family friendly stuff's got to get done. So you just jump in, and the idea of constantly fighting fires will be a familiar feeling to a lot of your listeners. But that thought of let's take a moment, step back, and consider our approach to this problem is hugely important. And I mentioned tech stack because it's not one of those things that comes naturally. But in restaurants, in any business, there's a core spine of technology you need to run your shop. And for restaurants, it could be food costing, recipe management, could be inventory management, but it's certainly reservation system. I mean, most restaurants use OpenTable, whether you use Resi, any of that. It's social media tools now. Now we're seeing a flood of AI-driven platforms come in, and we just started using a system called Slang to do AI-hosted concierge for our phones. So all these things need to play well together, or they're not optimized for your restaurant. So if you're using events management to reservations to inventory management to phone concierge service, certainly if you don't give some thought to this idea of a tech stack, what is the spine of my technology going to be? You could at best be suboptimal, at worst be spending money that has no return. So the idea of tech stack, like declining budget, is another super consultant speaky kind of term that actually has some validity to it if you incorporate it into your planning.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And so then, you went to Union Square, which is obviously one of the sort of preeminent brands in the hospitality industry. And Danny Meyer's a famous author and restaurateur and has built an incredible business. What are some of the things that you learned there, as sort of that next step in your journey?
Yeah, so when I started at Unisquare Hospitality Group, I was a title called Operations Specialist, which was great because it doesn't mean anything, right? Operations is the most generic tool, but it was really a boots on the ground approach to building a restaurant. And I worked at a restaurant called Myelina, which sadly doesn't exist anymore, although I
I've
have
been
ordered.
there.
They're
Fantastic.
going to open it again. Yeah, you remember that restaurant that you know and love is gone, but they're opening it up across Gramercy Park again. But I digress. So operations specialist was great because I was the guy who knew how to, run Excel and could put Word formats together and all that sort of really important but not sexy part of running a restaurant. And I was basically an office troll that was in the office for 9 months, putting together all the components of a restaurant that undergird any restaurant's success and profitability. And we're talking about costing models, which was especially difficult because we split inventory with the rooftop and banquets. Um, Floor plans to scheduling to tip sharing spreadsheets and all that stuff. I was kind of the funnel that built all that before they let me up to actually be on the dining room and talk to people and see the sun.
Was that sort of part of the culture of Union Square where they said, "Hey, you really need to sort of learn the fundamentals at a really, really sort of granular, intense level before you could actually be on the floor and working sort of, in customer facing aspects of the business? Or was that just sort of something that, by happenstance was how your job evolved?
Yeah, I think it was the role specific. So there were 10 front of house managers on the opening team. Only one of them, me, sat in the office all the time and built all the systems. So I think it was, hey, we need someone who is kind of a generalist, an Excel jockey and can handle the IT platforms. I mean, I built the Micros whole interface for the front end. So I was kind of that linchpin that dealt with a lot of those critical systems to enable the front of house team to be on the floor. Now, what was important about that was at that time, that's what I was good at. I didn't have the floor experience, certainly the wine knowledge, the culinary that the front of house managers had. So they were able to focus on their strengths. I accomplished mine, and later was I able to go to the front of house and gain those new skills.
Got it. Okay. Really cool. And, doing that sort of consultant style work, which, it's at that point you'd been to a really strong academic program, you'd had some consulting experience, you'd then spent almost a year kind of working on those types of projects within Union Square. Did that really sort of shape the way that you think about building a restaurant and building a hospitality brand today, or was it more just sort of a sort of trial or tribulation that you had to go through to earn your way up to the kind of more fun aspects perhaps of running a restaurant?
I think it was right up my alley and very much shaped the way I approach restaurants because, I'm not a foodie. I'm not a wine guy. I'm not even, had no aspirations of being a service director. What I love about restaurants, any business, is the interconnectedness of all these different processes. I mean, a guest, from the moment you think we should go out to dinner tonight till you pull out of my parking lot, there's a million things that have to go right through that journey that as a restaurateur, you get to influence all of that. And so dealing with the business as a bundle of interconnected processes is what I really love about what I do. It's not, I love food, I love to go out to eat, but I'm not a chef, I'm not a wine guy, I'm a systems guy, and that's kind of what I really enjoy.
So after Union Square, you were there for a couple of years, and then you decided to kind of go and start your own thing, really kind of move back to your roots and start building something with your own vision and experience. Tell us about that. What kind of gave you that sort of moment where you said, "Hey, it's time for me to make this big leap, and I feel like I'm prepared, and I feel like I, have clear vision, and I'm ready to do this."
Well, the first thing I'd say is you're never ready to do it. It's like having a kid. Raul, do you have kids by any chance?
Nope.
Yeah.
But
All right. So kids in
we're getting
business is a
ready for
lot of
that.
lot of there's a lot of purple in that Venn diagram. But if you sort of sit around and wait till you're ready, you're missing the point. No one's ever ready to go out and start their own business. And it's a huge risk. And actually, part of I don't think it was so grand as to say it was an epiphany, but part of my aha moment was, working in restaurants. You work with a lot of people who say, "Oh, I'm going to open my own restaurant one day." And I was hearing that constantly. Well, as you go through life, you get married, you have a kid, you get a family, you buy a home. As you gather all of these, let's call them milestones or responsibilities, the likelihood that you're going to take that risk and make the leap falls dramatically. So in my mind, it was, I was 24 at the time. It was a look, I'm either going to do this now or it's going to get successively harder each day. So it was very much a take the leap early because if it fails, I'd still be young and it was just me that didn't eat that night. It's not my wife and kids. So that was a big, big motivating factor.
Oh, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I feel like a lot of people give advice to, spend time sort of being an apprentice and developing sort of pattern recognition, and then, once you've done that for 10 or 20 years, go off and take the leap. But it seems like from your perspective, there's almost something sort of liberating about being early in your career, and the amount that you can fall is only so much, and you don't have all these people who are dependent on you. And so actually maybe in certain cases it makes sense to leap early.
Yeah, it's basic cost benefit analysis, right? Are there some benefits to working 20 years in the industry before you take that leap? I'm sure there are. I don't think those benefits are outweighed by starting early in the field, gathering an essential basket of skills that you need, and then taking the risk early enough where success or defeat, failure isn't such a big thing.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, great. Well, so then, you'd made this decision and you were getting ready to do it. And so what was your vision? What was your idea? How did you feel you were going to build something?
Yeah, it was actually a concept I'd honed in my time in upstate New York. Are you familiar with a band called The Band?
Yeah, I've heard of the band.
Yeah,
I
great.
can't name any songs, but I definitely would recognize some.
So their most famous song is called "The Weight." It's got this famous chorus, "Take a load off, Annie, take a load."
Yeah, right,
So,
of course.
driving through towns in upstate New York that are mentioned in that song, I had a thought that, boy, if I open a restaurant, I would want a place where someone could just relax. The song is about people adding burdens to you or adding weights as you go through life. So, I had this idea on a trip home when I was working at Maialino at the time. A friend of mine said, my family office is going to buy another property on Canton Street. My pitch to them was it's going to need a restaurant. Might as well be me. So I partnered with my high school best friend's dad, purchased this building. I pitched him the idea of the restaurant, and he said, all right, well, we'll give you a shot. So going in this space, got the chance to influence the build out and the kitchen and all those. We rehabilitated this beautiful old homestead on what then became kind of the restaurant row of my hometown. And that was 15 years ago.
Wow, amazing. And so that's Table and Main.
That one's Table Main. It opened in 2011.
Amazing. So, when I was looking up Table in Maine, which, I really look forward to visiting when I am in Atlanta next. But when I was looking at Table in Maine, I noticed a couple things online. So the first is that, you have almost 2,000 reviews online and it's like almost 5 stars, maybe 4.8 or 4.9 stars or something like that. And, you see a lot of businesses that have 5-star reviews, but you don't really see many that have that number of reviews and that high of a rating. Just to put it into perspective, like a restaurant like 11 Madison Park or Atomics or something like that might have like 1,000 or 2,000 reviews. What would you attribute that to? Is that deliberate? Is that just sort of the word of mouth? Is that just a reflection of the amount of time that the restaurant has been around and operating? What do you think kind of explains that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a combination of all of the above. I would attribute time the least amount of weight here because there's a bunch of restaurants around us that are a little older but have not a fraction of the reviews. I think Table and Main has always struck an emotional chord with people. And we try and be very visible, not only in our community, in our hometown, but also wherever the conversation of great food, great restaurants in Atlanta is happening. Table Main is in the mix after a decade and a half of quality and consistency. So I think that's the truest reflection of the ability to put people in the right role who can execute well and to build systems around them that function regardless of the person. Um, that's reflected in our online reputation.
Wow, awesome. A similar thing that I noticed is that on social media, you guys had an incredibly strong brand and a strong presence with Table and Main. I think over 10,000 followers. All of the posts have an incredible amount of engagement. It seems like very authentic. And when I've seen other restaurants try to build on the internet on social, it often is very frustrating for them. They feel like they have to learn these platforms that they don't know anything about, or, they just say, hey, I wish I could hire somebody who could focus on that, which is really expensive and maybe not a good use of resources, especially in the early days. They feel like they don't know how to take good photos. It seems like you guys have sort of cracked the code with both of your restaurants. I guess tell me a bit how you think about this new frontier. We all know that, restaurants like have such they're so heavily impacted by their social media presence. People discover so much online now.
Well, I'm thrilled to hear you say that because every Instagram, Facebook post we've ever posted has been from my iPhone. So I do it myself. And I would just attribute that to, I'm a good millennial. My iPhone is my appendage. It's attached to me all the time. And like it or not, Yeah, it's funny you mentioned I wish I could find someone who could do it better than I can for relatively cheap, and you just can't. It so my owner brain always says like, "Man, it takes up so much time and it really is a pain in the ass," but, I still wanna pay someone to do it. So, I think recognizing early that a a healthy, vibrant social media presence is just table stakes for a restaurant these days. And you remember Vine?
Sure. Yeah, those short
Yeah, we were
videos.
on Foursquare and we were on Vine. So, like, every time a new one comes up, it's just such a pain because I begrudgingly realized, well, shit, now I got to learn this one too. I mean, Instagram started doing reels and I had to learn how to do reels. So I think it's a pain, but you just kind of got to recognize you got to fish where the fish are. So if people are finding, Instagram is an exploration, a search tool. My wife and I, when we go on trips, we don't Google restaurants, we look on Instagram.
Right. Me too.
Yeah. So even things like it's just touching a bit of a nerve because I have so many of my staff. It's like you got to be on TikTok. And by so many of my staff, I mean the ones between like
It's an age
18 and
dependent.
25.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just not there. So Snap and TikTok I haven't queued up. And my rationale to myself is look, my guests are still on Facebook and Instagram. So I don't have to cross that leap just yet. And
Yeah.
maybe by the time I do, I'll be out of the game or something. But
Yeah. Amazing. Okay, cool. Well, so, you started the table and main journey 15 years ago, and obviously, with any new business, it takes some time to start to feel like you have your legs under you, and you have some predictability and consistency, and you feel like you can maybe sleep a little bit easier at night. Maybe tell me about the first, couple of years, or however long that initial part of the journey was, where things weren't necessarily as clear as maybe they are now.
yeah, I think it takes a restaurant at least 2 years to get in a rhythm and get its feet under it. It was 5 years before I really started pulling any money of any kind out of the business. So, one of my biggest advice to people, I'll never, tell people they shouldn't get into restaurants because it is so hard, but I'll tell them just reset your expectations. So those first 2 to 5 years, I mean, 2 years especially, I ran every shift 7 days a week, start to finish, did everything. Lived with my mom in the basement, my mom and dad in the basement. So I miss bachelor parties and weddings and all the things in life that happens on Saturdays and Fridays and the weekend. Because at that period of my life, I just said, look, this is what I'm about right now. And this is what I'm choosing to do. And that for a while was a challenge. Because if you think I was 25 and missing a lot of things that happen when you're friends and you turn 25. But I think I was very clear-eyed about this is what I'm doing, and all those other things are important, but they're not as important as this right now. So that was a struggle, and I don't. I think if you build it such that you're doing everything, that's okay for a little bit of time, but the goal should be to work your way out of that as soon as you can. Maybe 2 years is probably a little too long, but that was my journey.
So, it took you 5 years until you felt like you could start to really earn from the operations of the business. And how did that compare to your expectations going into it? Kind of building on your point about, maybe reframe your expectations if you're going to take this leap.
Yeah, at the time it was really fine, and I didn't really think about it. Like there was no resentment towards I'm not even making any money from this place. But again, I think that goes back to I'll be the first to admit I was incredibly selfish in those 2 years in saying no to all these things. But when you're 25, you can be pretty selfish. I lived at home. I had that benefit. My parents were great about making sure I ate at night. But I did it early enough such that I didn't have responsibilities towards other people, and I could afford to say no to everything but this vision. And you can't do. I was telling you before we turned on the cameras. I have 4 daughters right now. I could not do that then. Now I'm sorry. So that's another reason to do it early is because I think there's an incredible amount of selfishness that needs to happen when you start a business because the business needs to be your priority. It's just the way it is. It's too hard to do it any other way. So that was fine at the time.
Yeah. And, it sounded like you had a business partner in your high school close friend's father. were he and you sort of on the same page throughout this whole journey that, hey, this was a long, thing that you guys were signing up for, and it wasn't, necessarily that problematic that in the very beginning you were able to earn? Or did you guys have to have hard conversations along the way or do expectation resetting or
No, I
anything
think
like
I
that?
think we were very clear on the relationship from the get-go. And Doug's name's Doug, always he was always very clear. He's like, "I don't wanna own a restaurant. It's too hard, and I don't wanna work that hard." Doug had been very successful in his previous life, and so he was focused on the real estate. He wanted to buy the building, buy the property. He put a bunch of money into making it a restaurant. He was our sole investor, so he fronted the money for us to turn his building into our restaurant. And he said, "Look, I want to get paid back in X amount." We worked on the terms and everything, just like any operator is going to have to do when they open a business. Um, and I delivered on all the promises and expectations we had. But it was helpful because I think in a lot of restaurants, you hear the story of the investor, the landlord is a massively important relationship, and sometimes they're kind of jerks. Partnering with Doug, remember this is a guy who'd known me since I was 13. So high school Ryan had, a thread of reputation and he knew I wasn't a total wastrel. So Doug wanted to make the building beautiful and he did. And then he basically said, "All right, I'm not going to check in on you and go do your thing." As long as I paid him back by the timeline we'd set, we were good to go.
So, at some point you decided to start a second restaurant. It's from what I could tell online, it seemed like actually it was not that long after the first restaurant had started, and maybe even before that kind of 2 years of getting your feet under you
Yeah, it
had
was just
hit.
before 2 years.
Yeah. So tell me about that. I've heard a lot of people say that the shift of having to go from, hey, I'm in this one business, I'm there day to day, I can see everything with my own eyes, to now I need to sort of like spread my attention and my time across multiple businesses. That can be really hard. You have to make sure you've got people you can rely on. You have to make sure that you've got systems that can scale. You have to make sure that if you're in one business, like nothing's going crazy at the other business. How did you do it? What was necessary to make that happen?
Yeah, so Doug came to us just before Table and Main turned 2 and said, "Hey, a building down the street came open. I'm gonna buy it. I'm gonna put another restaurant in there. Do you guys want to do it?" And we said, "No, we're not ready." And then got to thinking about it. If it was gonna be another restaurant, well, someone's gonna compete with us. It might as well be us. So we got ready and decided to do an Italian restaurant based on, my experience at Maialino and my partner at the time, Ted, who was the chef, his experience cooking Italian food. We looked around in Roswell and said, what's missing and what can we do really well? And that was Italian. So I had a couple things going for me with this decision. One of which was the same landlord, so that made a lot of unknowns known. You at least go into it knowing, okay, I'm not going to get screwed here. The other thing was it's about 4 doors up the street. So if you look on Google Maps, it's very close. And I spend, even now, most of my nights just trucking back and forth between the two restaurants. And the other thing I had going for me was that the second restaurant is run by my older brother, Daniel, who was on the James Beard Award winning wine team at the Modern, another Danny Meyer restaurant in New York at the time. And I convinced him to move home and open the restaurant. He now runs it as the operating partner there. So everybody thinks we're twins. We're not twins, but we usually say we are because there's this weird moment of disappointment when people are like, "And y'all are twins, right?" And we say no, and they go, "Oh, you didn't want to go for the twin status." So we usually just say we're twins. So it's kind of joking where people say, "Oh, you have to clone yourself to run two restaurants." Well, I kind of did. Dan runs Osteria. I run uh, kind of both of them, and here we are.
Oh, that's great. So it seems like you've almost found kind of a recipe that works for you where you kind of work with people where there's sort of an underlying long-standing trust and you feel like you can really delegate and take your eyes off of it.
Yeah, one of the biggest things in running a business is who can I trust, right? And so working with my high school best friend Michael, his dad Doug, I can trust them. Working with my brother Daniel, I can trust him. If I can't trust my brother, I got bigger problems in the business. So a lot of that is, gosh, at least I know I'm not going to get stolen from or get screwed over, and that's a big weight off your shoulders. I think we got very lucky, and I don't know how often in your discussion with successful entrepreneurs, a lot of us are more lucky than we'd like to admit. There's that other great phrase, I'd rather be lucky than good. I've been very lucky. I've been very fortunate in my life. And if I give myself credit for anything, it's capitalizing on the hand I was dealt, you know? So these relationships I had, then I had a brother who's a James Beard celebrated sommelier at a Danny Meyer restaurant. Not everyone has that benefit, but man, we played the hell out of it. So if that's not entrepreneurship, capitalizing on opportunities you're given, I don't know what is. So we've done that well.
Cool. That's amazing. And maybe so shifting into another sort of aspect of the restaurant business. So you kind of talked a little bit earlier about tech stacks. And, one of the things I've just been noticing personally on Instagram is that I am just constantly getting bombarded with ads for different tech stacks that are going to help with different aspects of the restaurant business. And having talked to a lot of restaurant owners, many of them feel like they're not sure if it actually makes a difference. It can be quite expensive. You go on Reddit and you see all these people who are like, well, it was cool, but it was quite expensive and it didn't really make sense. And then other people who are like, oh, it made our business. And so I guess I'm curious, like, about a lot of different aspects of services that people use in their businesses, but maybe starting with tech stacks, like, what do you think actually, are good investments? Like, how do you decide if you're a new business owner, like what's a good, piece of software to invest in?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, the most central one to me is your reservations platform. And as you evaluate any different opportunity, you've got to consider not only the cost of it, obviously huge, got to consider that, but also the market you're in and the concept. So in all this proliferation of different tech platforms, which you're right, they're coming out of the woodwork. Is it solving a real problem? Because a lot of these things are pitching me problems I don't really think I have. You've got to consider, how am I going to define my return on investment? You got to consider what concept and what market am I in. For example, tell you a funny story about when I opened Table and Main. I was 25. One of my high school best friends, a different one, Brian, said to me, he's like, "Boy, I'd really like to come and support your restaurant a lot more, but it's kind of expensive." And I said, "Well, sorry to burst your bubble. I didn't build it for you. I built it for your parents." And I joke that I'm not on TikTok because my demographic is still on Facebook. So we have a demographic here in Roswell that I boil down to. It's my high school friends' parents. Um, so that means you're not going to see us on Resi or Talk or YouTube reservations, whatever weird ones out there now, because we're on OpenTable. That's where my clientele knows to look. So that thought pattern kind of ripples out across all your different tech options, and that's how I think you need to evaluate them. There's also a crucial other thing to consider, which is, what's your own personal aptitude. I'm again lucky that I'm a millennial. I know how to do Instagram, so I don't need to hire someone for that. But if you think it's crucial you're on Instagram and you suck at it, maybe that's worth looking into someone for you. A great example of that is we just looked at a platform called Loyalist. Are you familiar with this? Yeah, Loyalist presents a lot of really deep, granular information on your guests so you can construct customer journeys that automate a lot of touch points with the restaurant. So, GM sends a personalized text message or email kind of stuff. Really, really cool. I'm in Roswell, Georgia. They're mostly in LA, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Miami. Would that be really cool? Probably. And I won't argue that it would give me a strategic leg up on a lot of my competitors around here. But my marketing department is me, and I just don't have the bandwidth for it. So you've got to also consider, like, do I have the excess capacity to devote to not only using this, but learning it, learning how to master it so I can use it well, monitor the ROI, fix it when it breaks, all that good stuff. So I think you've also just got to consider, what systems are mission critical, what matches my market and my concept, and what do I have the bandwidth and capacity to truly leverage.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What are some other kinds of service providers or third party platforms or things that you've used? Like, I don't know, marketing agencies or PR people or just other things that you've kind of outsourced,
Yeah, we
if any.
used a PR firm in the past, and it was the fastest thing to go during COVID. And we're busier post-COVID than we've ever been. Last year was a record-breaking year. Both restaurants were on pace to beat it this year, and we don't have a marketing team. So I PR company, to me, that serves more ego than butts and seats. And I choose butts and seats over ego. So we don't spend the money there. I do have a company called Kerpop that is sort of keeping the engine humming on SEO marketing. So making sure our Google platform, Meta platform is just humming with ads. I don't spend a lot on that, but I look at it as it's always on 24/7, just keeping a baseline of awareness out there. I think we devote the most time, certainly, to Facebook, Instagram presence. I think we get a lot of business through that. Another interesting one we just started using is Slang, which is a AI-driven concierge phone service. There's others out there. Hosty is doing really interesting things, but this is one where there's such a proliferation of there's like a million different AI phone places. So that made a lot of sense to us. We went through an interesting conversation, my brother and I, about everybody, myself included. I hate when you call a company and you get a robot phone service, but it's ubiquitous now. People are getting used to it. And I won the argument by, I won't say I won the argument, but we rationalized to move forward with this by saying, we're open from 5 to 10, call it, and someone's answering the phones from 4 to 9. So that's a pretty limited window of the day where you're going to catch us. If you call anytime outside 4 to 9 p.m., you're going to get the voicemail, a robot. So I said, I would argue that true hospitality is enabling us to answer your question when you call 24/7. And so we chose an AI concierge service that is doing an okay job at this. It's getting better all the time. Of you call with, do you have a dress code? Can I make a reservation? Can I change a reservation? Where are you located? What is your menu? We can answer 98% of those, and there's always the option to talk to a real person. So I think, I mentioned that social media is kind of table stakes. Well, boy, if you're not thinking that AI is inevitable, you're just wrong. So the quicker we hop on this train, the better we'll get at it.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Okay, awesome. Well, let's move into a couple of last questions I had. So, one thing that I hear a lot about how restaurants are, like the easiest way to lose money, and it's very, very difficult to make it work. But on the flip side, there are so many examples of successful restaurants and food businesses. So if you had an entrepreneur who was maybe a few years into their thing and you tasted their food and it was like genuinely good food, what would you do to figure out like why it's not working for them? Like what would be the few questions you would ask to kind of like tease out where the flaws in their business model are?
Yeah, it's a few really basic ones of just show me your systems, introduce me to your team, and then I would just look at their tech. And by that, I mean their online presence, who's answering the phones and whatnot. And the reason, you can right now, all of your listeners, let's play a fun game called Think of a Restaurant with crappy food, but is pretty busy. There's a lot of. So unfortunately, I think this mythically high failure rate of restaurants is because people think it just takes good food. That's not true. It takes a lot of stuff to make a restaurant successful. So I think it comes down to, your food is good. I don't want to say that's irrelevant, but, if you want to go to Harvard and you don't have good grades, what are you doing? So like great food isn't even really braggable anymore because it's just the price of entry to excellence. So it's sort of like a box out, which, okay, your food is good enough. And what's the difference between a 3-star Michelin restaurant and a 2-star Michelin restaurant? No one's practically going to be able to discern in the real world 3-star versus 2-star, splitting hairs at that point. So your food needs to be good enough. But the real question is, what problem are you solving for your guests? And how have you created systems to consistently solve that problem?
Okay. Okay. So then maybe a good last question would be, you know, maybe take one restaurant in scenario one, they are not doing a good job of kind of honing in on what it is that they're trying to solve for their guests and, owning that and executing that really well across the life cycle. And then in another case, they're really doing it perfectly. What does really good look like? What does not good look like? And maybe you could take your own restaurant example. Like if you were doing it poorly versus how you actually are doing it, what would the contrast be?
Well, I want to add one more variable to that scenario, which is time, because you can fake it for a little while. You go to the casino, you can get on a hot streak and beat the casino over short periods. But over the long term, math will take over and the physics of entrepreneurship are undeniable. So over time, you can't get away with, I don't take inventory. I don't know the center of the cost plate on my dishes. I don't know what sells well. I didn't design my menu intentionally. So I think the difference is, you just ask those people, show me your order guides, show me your station setup sheets for your kitchen, show me your inventory list. There's a baseline of stuff you've got to do in restaurants, but in any business to make sure that you're on top of it, or else you're just running on luck. And you can do it that way. There are plenty of restaurants I know that have run on luck. Look at the Salt Bay guy. That guy got massively lucky, and I hope he capitalized on it. He opened up like 20 restaurants. He's selling $100 burgers and things, and they're all closing now. Because you can run off TikTok virality for a little bit, but then you just got to be good. And I'd rather be, and we talk about this all the time, in any city across America, look at Eater's hot restaurant list or your city's major food publications like, here are the hottest restaurants right now. How many of those places are going to be open in 10 years? The AJC, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, just came out with Atlanta's top 50 restaurants, and Table and Maine was on the list. I found it an interesting exercise to look at that same publication's same lists about 10 years earlier and then compare it to the new one and see, I would so much rather be quietly excellent over decades than be super sizzling hot for 3 years.
Yeah. So when you looked at the 10 years ago versus this past year's list, were there a number of different businesses that had kind of survived the test of time?
There's a ton of people who fell off the list. Attrition, that's the word I'm looking for. So I think it's really hard to do this over time. And that's I think what you've got to kick yourself out for the long term. I believe my background was really helpful in having me view that clearly because I really loved all the not sexy stuff, like putting a spreadsheet together and building out costing, and all those things is what propel your success over time.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, Ryan. Well, this has been incredibly informative. You've got just an incredible amount of wisdom to bring to bear, and I think people are really going to get just an awesome perspective from watching this. So, thank you so much. Really appreciate the
Yeah, you're
time,
very
and
welcome.
hope to do another round of this maybe in the future.
Well, you know where to find me. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for listening to Made Locally. If you found this useful, share it with another business owner who's in the trenches like you. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next episode. And if something stood out, I'd love to read your comments. See you in the next episode.